Like the old news.
All right, y'all. Well, I want to welcome you back to Pastor's Point of View. My name is Dr. Andy Woods, and I'm here with my friend and colleague and associate pastor and fellow elder, Dr. Jim McGowan. So
Good to be here.
It's good to have you here, and I'm happy to be here too. And I'm the pastor-teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church, and we're teaching the book of Revelation on Sundays.
Well, we are. It's awesome.
So if people want to follow us via live streaming or sermon audio and all that stuff, please do, or please come and join us in person if you live in the Houston area.
Yeah, we're also in the midst of ecclesiology.
Yes, we are. We're teaching ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church.
Fantastic.
Sunday school. But anyway, we're really not here to talk about that as much as I'd rather talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about a decision that was handed down. Today is June 8th, 2018. There was a decision that was handed down by the United States Supreme Court June the 4th, 2018 on Monday.
4 days ago.
4 days ago.
No.
And the title of this Supreme Court decision is entitled The Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission.
That's it.
And if folks have been following this case and cases like it, it has to do with a evangelical bakery owner who had a same-sex couple come into his establishment, require him to make a cake for their wedding, and he couldn't do that out of biblical convictions, so he had to turn the business down. And they didn't like that, and they sued him under the legislation in Colorado.
Yep.
And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a ruling. It's a decision we've been waiting for a long time.
That's right.
And what's happening out there is all these conservative groups are declaring victory because the decision went in favor of the bakery owner. And after all, it was 7-2.
Yes.
So people think it was a lopsided victory. And it was a decisive win for the Constitution and the First Amendment and Christianity. And what we're here to communicate to you is that it's not that way at all.
Yeah.
In fact, this decision, to my mind, actually may even make things worse, as we're going to explain.
It's kind of a smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors. And as I'll explain, I'm happy that the bakery owner was vindicated.
Yes.
But it was a very narrow decision. It helped him out, but the precedent established, to my mind, is highly dangerous, and we're going to try to unpack that today. But the things that we're going to communicate won't make any sense to people unless we alert people to the fact that we are in the middle of a conflict in this country.
That's true.
The conflict isn't new. The conflict has been going on really for the last 20 to 25 years or earlier, since I've been following the issue. And it has to do with taking civil rights criteria and expanding it.
Yes.
Now, in our country, when we awarded civil rights to certain individuals, they had to demonstrate certain criteria.
Right.
They had to demonstrate sizability, an innocuous or harmless characteristic about themselves. They had to demonstrate that they were persecuted economically because of that characteristic.
Yes.
And then they had to demonstrate that the characteristic was immutable or unchangeable. And that's been basically civil rights established criteria going all the way back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yeah, we did a session all about that. You really went into depth on that.
Yeah, we went into detail. People can find that on our YouTube channel. Just type in Andy Woods Pastor's Perspective or Andy Woods Pastor's Point of View, and that will come up. And in those sessions, what we talked about is this criteria had to be nailed down because this is a zero-sum game. What does that mean? Someone loses and someone wins. Once you establish something as a civil right, it prevents other people from discriminating on the basis of that civil right.
Right.
So in our culture, we have decided that discrimination against people based on race is wrong.
Right.
And we both, of course, applaud that and support that. Well, that takes away someone else's right. I can't run a business anymore discriminating on the basis of race.
Right.
So that's why this criteria, civil rights criteria, is so significant.
Yes.
And what's happened over the course of time since 1964 is this criteria is being discarded. And now people are being awarded civil rights status that don't meet these criteria, such as same-sex couples. And now it's moving to the point where you could have two men and a woman getting married together, or a man and a boy.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is we've moved away from traditional civil rights criteria and now are enthroning civil rights status or awarding civil rights status on the basis of people's behavior.
It's like a hole in a dam.
Yeah.
Once you start that first hole, eventually that hole is going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger until the dam is gone.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And because this is a zero-sum game, someone wins, someone loses. What you're starting to see is the gradual chipping away of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And so that's sort of what we're going to be talking about. And a lot of people say, well, what are you guys so, upset about, related to this issue? I mean, what's the big deal about, baking a cake for a same-sex couple? And in fact, we even have Andy Stanley, who, according to something I read recently, is the pastor of the largest Protestant church in America.
Is that right?
It's astounding for me to think that this guy's at the helm of the largest church in America. This is the son of legendary pastor Charles Stanley.
That's right.
And he basically doesn't see any problem making a cake for a same-sex wedding. He doesn't see any problem with the government coercing people, Christians, to do that. And do you mind reading that quote to us that we have here?
All right. Yes, this is a quote from Andy Stanley. This says, megachurch pastor rejects his father's bigotry. Jesus would want you to bake a gay wedding cake. Andy Stanley has spoken out against religious freedom, legislation that allows Christians to deny service to gay customers, saying such discrimination violates biblical teachings. Quote, serving people we don't see eye to eye with is the essence of Christianity, close quote, he said. Quote, Jesus died for a world with which he didn't see eye to eye. If a bakery doesn't want to sell its products to a gay couple, it's their business, literally. But leave Jesus out of it, close quote.
So, this quote to me is unbelievable because he's almost oblivious to the First Amendment issue that we're going to be talking about. Should the government coerce people to do things against their will, against their convictions, under the force of law?
Yeah.
And basically this quote is a reaction to legislation that was designed to protect the Christian.
Right.
So if you do that, you're a bigot, according to this citation, because it says here in the newsline, Andy Stanley has spoken out against religious freedom. Yeah. The headline says, rejects his father's bigotry. Yeah. His father, the legendary Charles Stanley, someone I've always had a very high regard for, obviously had a different view on this issue than his son. Yes. And he basically makes the point that after all, Jesus, was all about helping people. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of folks out there don't really see why we're alarmed about this. Because homosexuality has become enthroned in our culture, number one. And you've got the pastor of the largest Protestant church in America basically making statements that the Christian thing to do is for the government to coerce people against their convictions to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. So what I like to do with this situation is I just like to change the facts around so people can understand why we're upset about this. Let's suppose, for example, that you are a Holocaust survivor. Or maybe you have Holocaust survivors in your family, and when they got back from the Holocaust and they survived the Holocaust, they came to America, they started a bakery, and that business now has been handed off to you as their descendant. Okay, and then all of a sudden the Nazis come to town, and they say, "Hey, we're having an event, the neo-Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
We're having an event, and we want some Nazi cakes made, and we want some swastikas on the cakes.
Mm-hmm.
And they come into your place of establishment as either a Holocaust survivor yourself or, a descendant of a Holocaust survivor, and they demand that you make the cake. And when you turn them down, they go to the legal system and try to force you to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the situation that we're dealing with here. Should the legal system, through the force of law and compulsion, force people to use their creative abilities to do something that goes against their deep-seated convictions?
Right.
That's the issue here with
Yes.
this same-sex
Yeah.
couple that wanted a cake made.
Mm-hmm.
And so forth. So that's what I'm saying is we're in the middle of a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
The conflict is freedom of speech and freedom of religion on one side of the stick, and this ever-increasing, expanded criteria outside of the traditional criteria for civil rights moving into the area of homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And you see what's happening in the culture is the two are in conflict with each other.
Right.
This conflict has been brewing probably for 25 years or more. Now, the left in this country, the progressive left, wants us as Bible-based Christians to just roll over and play dead.
Right.
I mean, they could care less what our issues are with homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to make it a civil right, and they want to coerce us against our will.
Right.
To go against our deep-seated convictions. So to communicate that, I want to play two clips. The first clip is by Hillary Clinton, who, as we all know, was within a millimeter of becoming the next president of the United States. And as the clip's only a minute, each of these clips are just a minute, and I want to show people the mindset of the progressive left towards our deeply held convictions based on Scripture, history, and tradition.
Yeah, this is serious.
So if we have that clip, let's go ahead and run that.
But far too many women are still denied critical access to reproductive health care and safe childbirth. All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will, and deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. As I have said, and as I believe, the advancement of the full participation of women and girls in every aspect of their societies is the great unfinished business of the 21st century. And not just for women, but for everyone. And not just in faraway countries, but right here in the United States.
So, when these two forces come into conflict with each other, expanded civil rights coverage based on behavior to lifestyles that go against the Bible, which is the direction civil rights law is moving.
Yes.
When that comes into conflict with a deep-seated religious conviction, which used to be protected by the First Amendment,
right,
under freedom of speech and freedom of religion. When those two forces come into existence, that's the conflict that we're talking about here. And Hillary Clinton's mindset is deep-seated religious codes and structural biases have to capitulate.
Right.
They have to be changed.
Right.
Now, it's interesting in the clip that we just played, she doesn't say how they're going to be changed. Are they going to be changed through criminal prosecution? Are they going to be changed through mandatory re-education? But what she's saying, it's the voice of totalitarianism, folks, is what you're hearing. When these two forces come into existence, your Bible-based rights means zero.
That's right.
And they have to concede or capitulate to the new way of thinking under expanded civil rights law.
Yes.
That's the clash that's happening right now.
Yeah.
It's been happening for a quarter of a century or more. And that's what this masterpiece cake shop case that we're going to be going into today is all about. Let me play clip number 2. This is from a California legislator, Al, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right, Moratsuchi. He is the author, if I'm not mistaken, of Assembly Bill 2943. I think it's still pending before the governor. He'll probably sign it into law, Governor Brown.
Good old Jerry Brown.
And it really deals, this particular law, it's interesting, deals with a ban on books. I don't know how to say it nicer than that. Under calling something fraudulent under the legal system if it advocates changing someone's sexuality. So this bill has been called the anti-Bible bill because conceivably under the language of this statute, the Bible could be looked at as a fraudulent book and come under the negative auspices of the legal system in California should this become law. It looks like it is going to become law. Now, you ask yourself, well, what about the First Amendment? What about freedom of speech? What about freedom of religion, which is this conflict that we're talking about here? And Moratsuchi's mindset is exactly like Hillary's. The religious community needs to just capitulate.
Suck it up, capitulate.
Suck it up, capitulate, roll over, and play dead because we're in a new paradigm now.
Right.
So let's play the Moratsuchi video clip so folks can hear this assemblyman from his own words.
As a former prosecutor with the Attorney General's Consumer Rights Section, and as a prosecutor of the Consumer Legal Remedies Act in particular, I want to make it absolutely clear that the First Amendment does not prohibit banning fraudulent conduct. The faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. The science is clear. When you look at the support list, it includes the California Medical Association, the California Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the claim that the First Amendment can be used as a defense for promoting fraudulent conduct is a fallacious argument.
So there it is in black and white. It's just like the Hillary quote.
Got to evolve, brother.
Yeah, the faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. Hillary, her phrasing of it is deep-seated religious codes and structural biases. That's those of you that hold to the biblical position on homosexuality. Those need to be changed. So you can see this conflict that we're in.
Yeah.
And how desperate we are for the court to come in and fix this problem.
Yes.
And that's what we hoped would happen through this masterpiece cake shop case. But Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion on page 14, describes this conflict that we're trying to articulate. Would you mind reading the Clarence Thomas quote?
I'm happy to do so. He starts out and he says, in Obergefell, and let me quickly comment on that. He's referring to the Obergefell versus Hodges opinion that came about in 6/26/2015, which was a 5-4 decision that gave all 50 states enforced the idea of same-sex marriage. So that's what he's referring to. He says, in Obergefell, I warned that the court's decision would inevitably come into conflict with religious liberty, quote, as individuals are confronted with demands to participate in and endorse civil marriages between same-sex couples, close quote. This case, now he's talking again about the masterpiece case, this case proves that the conflict has already emerged because the court's decision vindicates Phillips, who was the, I guess, what is he?
He's the baker.
The baker, right?
Colorado baker.
It vindicates Phillips' right to free exercise. It seems that religious liberty has lived to fight another day. But in future cases, the freedom of speech could be essential to preventing Obergefell from being used to, quote, stamp out every vestige of dissent, close quote, and, quote, vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy, close quote. If that freedom is to maintain its vitality, reasoning like the Colorado Court of Appeals must be rejected, he says.
Okay. So notice his repetition of the word conflict.
Yes.
He says he's actually quoting something he wrote in the Obergefell case back in 2015.
Yeah.
And the reason I like that quote is it describes what we're trying to articulate here.
He was kind of prophetic there, wasn't he?
Yes, he sure was. Yeah. And, you know, here's the issue, folks. You've got traditional civil rights criteria being changed to accommodate people's behaviors. Because this is a zero-sum game, somebody wins, somebody loses. Every time that expansion is made, you start chipping away and chiseling away at the belief of the Christian that used to be protected under the First Amendment, under freedom of speech and freedom of exercise of religion, and they have to capitulate to this new way of thinking. That's what the congressman or the legislator from California was saying. We need to evolve with the times. And that's what Hillary Clinton was saying related to deep-seated religious codes and structural biases. So all of that we just laid out there is just introduction. We haven't even gotten to the Masterpiece Cake Shop case yet. But I want people to just see the context in which this case arises.
Yes, sir.
Now, having said all that, what were the facts in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case? Well, here's basically what happened, and you can find this in the form of a PDF online. I think we could post that, can't we, or link it on our Facebook page somewhere. It should be on the paper that I gave you. And I would challenge people to actually read this decision. I spent really all week reading this decision. I think it spans about 57 pages. And what I'm noticing is a lot of people are commenting on this, declaring it some kind of victory for Christianity. And that it's obvious to me they haven't read the decision. So here's basically what happened. In 2012, Charlie Craig and Dave Mullins, a same-sex couple, went into the establishment of Jack Phillips, who is a evangelical Christian and a bakery owner. Apparently he has a lot of talent and ability designing cakes and things like that. And they came in and they said, we want a cake for our same-sex wedding. Phillips at that point said no to them because marriage is something that God has ordained. He's a Bible-based Christian. He defines marriage based on the Bible. One man for one woman for one life. That's the biblical standard. And he felt that if he was to participate, utilize his skills to participate in this same-sex wedding in that sense, it would violate his deep-seated religious convictions. He thought he was protected by the First Amendment, too, when he made that decision. And in fact, Justice Kennedy, page 4 of his decision in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, articulates basically what Phillips said to these two individuals. Do you mind reading that?
All right. So Justice Kennedy writes this. He says, the following day after this event took place, Craig's mother, who had accompanied the couple to the cake shop and been present for their interaction with Phillips, telephoned to ask Phillips why he had declined to serve her son. Phillips explained that he does not create wedding cakes for same-sex weddings because of his religious opposition to same-sex marriage, and also because Colorado at that time did not recognize same-sex marriages. He later explained his belief that, quote, to create a wedding cake for an event that celebrates something that directly goes against the teachings of the Bible would have been a personal endorsement and participation in the ceremony and relationship that they were entering into, close quote.
So he just stood on the biblical grounds. I'm not going to participate in this. And it's sort of interesting that in all of these cases, there's not a shortage of cake makers.
Right.
There have been several of these cases that have broken out all over the country. And in every single case that I've ever read, the cake maker, who happens to be a Christian, says, well, just go down the street. And there's a cake maker down there that will meet your needs.
Right.
So that option was available. And then Phillips goes on and he says, look, I'll make birthday cakes for you. I'll make cookies for you.
Yep.
But when it comes to making a cake for a wedding, I can't do that. And Phillips does not discriminate on the basis of hiring.
That's right.
He has no issue with hiring somebody to work for him that's of the same sex persuasion.
Right.
And he sells products across the board to everybody, regardless of their sexual orientation. He just said, in this instance, I can't be involved in using my God-given creative abilities that I used to start this bakery and start this business to do something that goes against my deep-seated biblical convictions. In fact, you have that second citation there from Kennedy concerning Phillips.
Yes. Kennedy writes, Phillips informed the couple that he does not, quote, create wedding cakes for same-sex weddings. He explained, I'll make your birthday cakes, shower cakes, sell you cookies and brownies. I just don't make cakes for same-sex weddings, close quote. The couple left the shop without further discussion.
I mean, it seems like the fellow, Jack Phillips, was pretty reasonable.
Well, he said he'd make a shower cake for him.
Make a birthday cake for you,
Yeah.
shower cake for you, sell you cookies and brownies. It's just I have a conscience issue related to weddings.
And these were things that he had been doing all along. So
that's exactly right. Now, Thomas, in his concurring opinion, page 10, talks about the basic benevolence of this guy, Jack Phillips.
Yes.
And this is important to understand because the left in this country is trying to turn this man
they're vilifying him
into some kind of white supremacist and some kind of hater.
Yes.
And when you actually read the decision and get into the facts, you find that this guy was very benevolent and very generous. Would you read what Thomas says?
Absolutely. On page 10 of his decision, or his commentary.
His concurring opinion.
Yeah, his opinion. Thomas says, Phillips routinely sacrifices profits to ensure that Masterpiece operates in a way that represents his Christian faith. He is not open on Sundays. Get this, folks. He pays his employees a higher than average wage, and he loans them money in times of need. What a bad guy, right? Phillips also refuses to bake cakes containing alcohol, cakes with racist or homophobic messages, cakes criticizing God, and cakes celebrating Halloween, even though Halloween is one of the most lucrative seasons for bakeries. Oh my gosh, let's just blow his shop up.
Yeah. And it's interesting, he says he's not open on Sundays, so he's kind of like Chick-fil-A in that sense.
Yep.
So what if someone comes in on Sundays and says, we want a cake made? Well, he would have to say, I'm sorry, we're not open for business today.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that discriminatory?
It might become.
How is that different than turning down a same-sex wedding? It's just basic freedom of speech, freedom of religion, wanting to run your life and your business according to your own convictions.
You know, Pastor, I remember growing up seeing a sign in stores all the time. It was very common down here in the South especially, and the sign said, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone.
Yeah, I used to see that sign that said no shirt, no shoes,
no service,
no dice.
no dice.
And I don't know, we used to honor that as far as a private property business owner. But you see, what's happening is the legal system is getting involved because of expanded civil rights criteria.
That's the issue.
And coercing this man against his will.
Yes.
So, and I think he was set up. I think they knew he would turn him down. They were trying to make a legal issue here.
The two men were activists.
Yes.
So we know that. That's demonstrable.
Right. So rather than just go down the street and get a cake made by somebody else, they decide to say that this man violated the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act.
Yeah.
And in the syllabus of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, we have a description of that act. Do you mind reading that excerpt?
Yes. And here's what it says. Colorado Civil Rights Commission, pursuant to the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, which prohibits, as relevant here, discrimination based on sexual orientation in a, quote, place of business engaged in any sales to the public and any place offering services to the public, close quote.
So we have this Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. This couple went into Jack Phillips' establishment, I think knowing that he would violate that act.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so consequently, they make it an illegal issue because of that particular act. And I remember, I think this would go back 20 to 25 years ago when I was following these kinds of issues. This would go back to 1992. In 1993, I remember specifically the state of Colorado. I think there were 3 municipalities that passed legislation basically saying that we're not going to submit to these type of acts. And that, if I remember correctly, was part of a case that made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. But my point is, I remember 20, 25 years ago, seeing Colorado move in this direction, and I remember saying, this is going to create a collision.
Yep.
I mean, there's an inevitable collision that's coming between this new criteria and the First Amendment rights of the Bible-believing Christian.
Yeah.
And I remember articulating this. I was in law school at the time, as it was going on in California with a bill called AB 101, where they were starting to experiment with this. And I said, you know, y'all, I remember being laughed at by people when I articulated it. This is going to create a collision between the First Amendment beliefs of folks and this new civil rights criteria. And lo and behold, here we are, Brother Jim, 20 to 25 years later, and the very collision I saw coming is happening right before our eyes. In fact, that's what this Masterpiece Cake Shop case is about. Now, am I a prophet or something? No, I'm just someone that can look at the world and see obvious trends happening in the world and see a collision course, in fact, a head-on collision with the rights and convictions that I hold dear.
Well, you know, it's called thinking through a decision.
Yeah.
You know, every decision you have to think it through to its logical conclusion.
Yeah. And that's what Thomas is pointing out.
Yeah.
So we've kind of laid out the issue in terms of introduction. I've given you the facts of the case. And let's move on to what's called the procedural posture. What does that mean? How did a case like this finally get to the United States Supreme Court? Well, basically what happened is the Colorado Civil Rights Commission got involved, and they determined that there was probable cause that Jack Phillips violated the American, let's see if did I get the name right? The Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. Let's just call it CADA, or CADA for short. And so this group, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, refers the case to someone called the administrative law judge. The administrative law judge rules in favor of the same-sex couple, compels Phillips, under the force of law, to bake the cake. That's the ruling anyway. And in the process rejected Jack Phillips' claims that he was being coerced against his own convictions in violation of his freedom of speech rights and freedom of religion rights. Now, here's what the name they're giving to people like Jack Phillips. They're saying you're homophobic.
Right.
That word phobia is very important to understand. When you look up phobia in a dictionary, in fact, phobos is actually a Greek word, is it not, for fear? Phobia is an irrational fear. When someone calls you phobic, they're saying you have an irrational fear of something. And may I just say that Jack Phillips has no irrational fear.
Right.
He's standing on what the Bible says. And he's standing on what Christianity has taught on this subject for 2,000 years.
That's right.
So there's no phobia involved here. What's happening is this administrative law judge is forcing him to violate his own biblical convictions.
Right.
He's not forcing him to violate a phobia.
Right.
He's enforcing him to violate a deep-seated belief, the kind of thing that Hillary says has to change in people.
Well, you know, Pastor, if he really was homophobic, he wouldn't be baking birthday cakes and shower cakes and cookies and brownies for homosexuals.
That's right.
And yet he said he would do that.
That's right. Doesn't sound homophobic at all.
It doesn't sound that way to me.
Right.
Not at all.
But they want to portray you in a certain light. They want to make you look mentally unstable.
Oh, yes.
So they
That's
throw
right.
that word phobia at you.
That's right.
So what happened is the ruling of the administrative law judge got appealed to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. The Colorado Civil Rights Commission, who originally said there was probable cause that Phillips violated the CADA, not surprisingly, affirmed the decision of the administrative law judge. And when you issue a ruling like that, there are remedies. In other words, the legal system comes in now and says, here are the specific things that you, Mr. Jack Phillips, must do. And Kennedy articulates those on page 6 and page 8 of his decision. So why don't you read that?
All right. Here's
so we can understand what's at stake here.
Yes, he writes the following: if the commission determines that the evidence proves a CADA violation, it may impose remedial measures as provided by statute. Available remedies include, among other things, orders to cease and desist a discriminatory policy, to file regular compliance reports with the commission, and to take affirmative action, including the posting of notices setting forth the substantive rights of the public. Colorado law does not permit the commission to assess money damages or fines. The commission affirmed the ALJ's decision in full, and the commission ordered Phillips to cease and desist from discriminating against same-sex couples by refusing to sell them wedding cakes or any product they would sell to heterosexual couples. It also ordered additional remedial measures, including comprehensive staff training on the public accommodations section of CADA and changes to any and all company policies to comply with this order. The commission additionally required Phillips to prepare quarterly compliance reports for a period of 2 years, documenting the number of patrons denied service and why, along with a statement describing the remedial actions taken.
So you see what's happened here? Now the government, who doesn't know anything about running a bakery.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy started this bakery, to my understanding, from scratch, based on his God-given abilities.
Right.
I can't go out and start a bakery like this. I don't have any abilities in this area. What would I know about running it? Well, now the government gets involved in telling him how to run his business.
Yeah.
So now he's forced to cease and desist discriminatory policy, file regular compliance reports, post notices. It actually talks here about quarterly compliance reports, staff training, and these compliance reports are supposed to go on for 2 years, and on we could go with these remedies. And I guess these people that impose these things on this man, I would suggest this: none of them, this administrative law judge, this Colorado Civil Rights Commission, none of them have ever run a small business.
No.
And they have no idea the pressure you put on a small business person to meet all these obligations. You get him involved in all kinds of things he probably doesn't know much about, the legal system. And to my mind, this type of tyrannical behavior is designed to cripple his business, make an example out of him.
It's to run him out of business.
And to run him out of business and force him out.
Yeah.
And so, in essence, this is what happened. And if that weren't bad enough, and this is the key thing people need to understand in order to understand the ruling in Masterpiece Cake Shop, this commission demonstrated abject hostility to Mr. Phillips, because the commission met several times, for the purpose of discussing all of these things. And in the process, they made some of the craziest statements imaginable. So would you mind reading what Kennedy says on pages 12 and 13? And this is the issue that Kennedy took exception with.
And rightly so. Kennedy writes, one commissioner, okay, the commissioner sitting on this commission, right? One commissioner suggested that Phillips can believe whatever he wants to believe, but cannot act on his religious beliefs if he decides to do business in the state.
So you can be religious all you want, but keep it at home and keep it in your church and don't bring it into your business life. Well, there's a problem there
Holy
with
cow.
folks, because a lot of us as Christians start businesses to glorify God. That's our motivation.
Right.
And what we're being told here is you can't do that by this particular commission member.
Yeah.
Page 13, a few moments later, what else did this same individual say?
All right. A few moments later, the commissioner restated the same position, quote, if a businessman wants to do business in the state and he's got an issue with the laws impacting his personal belief system, he needs to look at being able to compromise, close quote.
He needs to evolve with the
There it
times,
is.
in other words.
Yeah.
Deep-seated religious beliefs
Yeah.
have to change.
Got to change
So
them.
they're just rolling right over
Got to evolve.
his First Amendment rights, and they're actually going on record
Yeah.
saying this.
Yeah.
And if that weren't enough, they start comparing his religious beliefs to the Holocaust and to slavery.
Unbelievable.
Would you read that quote to us?
Yes. All right. So here's another commissioner, right? He made specific reference to the previous
And just real quickly, by way of review, we're talking about the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that is affirming the ruling of the administrative law judge. Okay.
Yes. So we already talked about one commissioner. Now here's another commissioner. And it says here, another commissioner made specific reference to the previous meeting's discussion, but said far more to disparage Phillips' beliefs. The commissioner stated, quote, I would also like to reiterate what we said in the hearing of the last meeting. Freedom of religion and religion has been used to justify all kinds of discrimination throughout the history, whether it be slavery, whether it be the Holocaust, whether it be, we can list hundreds of situations where freedom of religion has been used to justify discrimination. And to me, it's one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use to use their religion to hurt people, close quote.
So if you have deeply seated beliefs about, using your abilities as a baker to participate in a same-sex couple, your beliefs are despicable.
Despicable, yeah.
They're rhetorical, according to this quote, meaning they're not really sincere.
Yeah.
And, you're just as bad as someone that used the Bible to promote slavery and the Holocaust.
Well, you're a slaver. Yeah.
And this is what's coming out of the mouth of these
Unbelievable.
commissioners. Now, if all of that, Brother Jim, weren't enough, this Colorado Civil Rights Commission was wildly inconsistent on their handling of cases, because around the same time, according to this decision, there was an individual named William Jack
Yes.
who came into 3 bakeries in the state of Colorado, and this time the shoe was on the other foot.
Yeah.
Apparently these other bakeries were people that were of the same-sex persuasion or sympathetic to that view. And Mr. Jack comes in, and he wants cakes made for Bible-based events. He wants Bible verses on the cakes. He wants the cakes kind of formed and shaped and developed to look like a Bible. And in fact, Ginsburg on page 3 talks about this, what William Jack did. And this was around the same period of time, March 13th, 2014, where the Phillips case was taking place just a few years earlier. So notice the wild inconsistency in how this Colorado Civil Rights Commission handled these cases. You mind reading what Ginsburg says?
Okay, here we go, folks. On March 13th, 2014, listen to this, approximately 3 months after the ALJ ruled in favor of the same-sex couple, Craig and Mullins, 3 months now, And 2 months before the commission heard Phillips' appeal from that decision, William Jack visited 3 Colorado bakeries. His visits followed a similar pattern. He requested 2 cakes, quote, made to resemble an open Bible. He also requested that each cake be decorated with Bible verses. He requested that one of the cakes include an image of 2 groomsmen holding hands with a red X over the image. On one cake, he requested on one side, God hates sin, and Psalm 45:7, and on the opposite side of the cake, he wanted homosexuality is a detestable sin, and Leviticus 18:2. On the second cake, the one with the image of the 2 groomsmen covered by a red X, Jack requested these words. Listen to this. God loves sinners, and on the other side, he wanted, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, Romans 5:8, close quote.
Now, I don't know why this guy William Jack did this. I don't know what his motivation was, but in a certain sense, I'm glad he did it because it exposed the inconsistency of this Colorado Civil Rights Commission. The Colorado Civil Rights Commission decides against Jack Phillips when it's an evangelical Christian bakery owner with a same-sex couple wanting a cake made. When the shoe's on the other foot, they come to the opposite conclusion.
Yeah.
When it's a same-sex bakery owner and a Christian that wants a cake made, suddenly who do they side with? They side with the bakery owner.
Yeah.
So this is all brought out in this decision, showing how totally inconsistent this Colorado Civil Rights Commission is.
Yeah.
They're just flying by the seat of their pants. They've got no universal standard that they're following.
Maybe there's an agenda.
And they're just following really their own biases. Now, when all of this is going on, the fellow Colorado Commission members never once correct the terrible statements made by the other 2. Nor does the Colorado Appeals Court. They never comment on this. They never correct it.
Yeah.
They never bring it to the surface. And so this case then moves from the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that handled it very inconsistently and in a matter of a great deal of bigotry, as far as I can tell. And it goes to the the Colorado Court of Appeals. What do? They affirm the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which had already affirmed what the administrative law judge had done.
Yeah.
And in the process, this Colorado Court of Appeals makes, to me, a totally ridiculous statement. They said, well, you know, Jack Phillips has a problem making cakes for same-sex weddings. He should still be forced to do that under the law, but if he just put a sign out in front of his bakery saying, you know, I'm against this.
Yeah.
That's like the Nazis coming to town in the scenario I talked about a little earlier, and a Holocaust survivors running a bakery, and the Nazis demand that a cake be made, and the Holocaust survivor running the bakery just says, well, the court says, just put a sign out in front of your bakery indicating that you're against this, but we're still going to force you to do it. That's about the silliness of this logic.
It is silly.
And Thomas brings this up on page 8. Do you mind reading that?
Yes. Justice Thomas writes, it also emphasized that Masterpiece could, quote, disassociate itself from same-sex marriage by posting a disclaimer stating that Colorado law requires it not to discriminate, or that the provision of its services does not constitute an endorsement, close quote.
So that's how they decided to handle this collision. We're going to force you to make the cake, but you're free to put a sign out front that says, I don't agree with making the cake, but we're going to force you to do it anyway. Yeah. So that's the procedural posture, and that's how this case finally got before the Supreme Court of the United States. So this sort of flashes us forward to what just happened on Monday. The Supreme Court of the United States issued what's called a writ of certiorari. And what does that mean? It means the Supreme Court of the United States decided to take this case, and they have wide discretion concerning what cases they can take and what cases they won't take.
Mm-hmm.
They typically take cases where they're going to come in and fix a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we were so much on the edge of our seats up until Monday,
Hopeful.
thinking that the United States Supreme Court was going to fix this collision course.
Right.
So let me explain what the United States Supreme Court did in Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. They reversed those lower rulings.
Mm-hmm.
They reversed the Colorado Court of Appeals,
Mm-hmm.
who had affirmed the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, who had affirmed the administrative law judge decisions. They reversed that. And that's happy for Jack Phillips because he's sort of let off the hook.
Yeah.
And his rights are being venerated. And so what happened is the whole conservative world started to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, what a great victory.
Yeah.
For Christianity. What a great victory for the First Amendment. What a great victory for freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And here's the problem is people didn't read the decision.
Yeah.
And I think what happens a lot of times is people don't read a decision. It goes on for 57 to 59 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to wade through. And they try to scoop each other.
Mm-hmm.
And let me be the first person to get out there and announce a victory.
Yeah.
And what happens with a lot of these people is they rely on what other people have said.
Yeah.
But amazing things happen when you turn off all the commentary and you actually read the decision yourself. Because when you read the decision yourself, the ruling here, it may have been good for Phillips,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not good for Christianity.
Good in the short term.
Good in the short
Not
term.
in the long term.
And I have a little experience, Brother Jim, as a licensed attorney in the state of California, and also as a graduate of American Bar Association approved law school, of reading decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically all I did for 3 years in law school is read decisions. As the saying goes, the first year they scare you to death, the second year they work you to death, and the third year they bore you to death. Reading decision after decision after decision. So it had a good immediate result,
Mm-hmm.
but a very poor precedent.
Yeah.
And this is what most people are missing in their commentary. This is not a victory.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that makes you suspicious of this is the decision is 7-2.
Yes.
Now, in recent history, when we've had major precedent-breaking, precedent-making decisions, it hasn't been 7-2.
No.
It hasn't been lopsided.
No.
It's been 5-4 going one way or the other.
Yeah.
The second thing that makes you very suspicious of this decision is the architect of it is Justice Kennedy.
Yes.
Justice Kennedy is the architect of the 2015 decision called Obergefell versus Hodges, which created a right to same-sex marriage, a constitutional right to same-sex marriage out of thin air.
Yep.
And in fact, in that decision, Kennedy briefly, almost in passing, discussed this conflict that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And in this conflict, he says this, look, those of you that hold a traditional marriage, you have a right to advocate and teach it in your church, basically is what he says.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have a right to bring it out into the public.
Mm.
And I'm sorry, Brother Jim, but that's
Wow.
just not what the First Amendment says.
That's right.
Do you mind reading the First Amendment to us there?
I would love to. Here's what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
See, my freedom of religion rights are not just about advocating and teaching in my place of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the free exercise of religion, which is a God-given right,
That's
because
right.
according to the Declaration of independence, our rights come from God.
There
if
we
people
go.
don't like that, they can
That's
second guess what Thomas Jefferson wrote
Yeah.
in the Declaration of Independence, America's birth certificate signed in 1776. Now, what does that right allow me to do? Everywhere I go, that right follows me. If I exercise it in church, it follows me.
Yes.
Free from government intervention.
That's right.
If I go to my place of work, it follows me. If I start a business, it follows me.
That's right.
Free exercise is completely different than the right to advocate and teach in my church.
Yes.
And you see, by using language like advocate and teach, Kennedy shrunk that right. And one of the big things you see in politicians, our former president did this frequently, President Obama, is he used the expression freedom of worship. No, the First Amendment doesn't say freedom of worship, folks.
Right.
It says the free exercise of religion.
Yes.
Every time a politician uses the expression freedom of worship, you should challenge that politician. You should post things on Facebook. You should write letters to the editorial board of your local newspaper. You should email that politician and his or her constituents, because freedom of worship is not what the First Amendment says.
That's
freedom
right.
of worship is what you do in your church.
Right.
It's what you do in your house.
Yes.
That is not what the First Amendment guarantees. It guarantees the free exercise of religion.
Yes.
So Kennedy, by using the expression the right to advocate and teach, shrunk, in my opinion, the scope of the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. And so that's why, if he is the author of the masterpiece Cake Shop case that just came out, how could it be a conservative victory?
Right. Right.
And if you put your ear to the ground and listen very carefully, you can hear the late Ronald Reagan rolling over in his grave.
Yeah.
Because Reagan is the one that appointed Kennedy to this position. And that just goes to show you that just because a Republican president appoints a jurist, that doesn't mean that jurist is going to fly correctly.
Got to do your homework.
And interpret things correctly.
Yeah.
I think Justice Kennedy has done more damage to the American judicial system. He's done more damage to the fabric of our culture, perhaps, than any jurist I can think of, other than Harry Blackmun, who wrote the infamous Roe versus Wade decision. And if the Republican Party had any guts or courage, they would impeach, I think, start impeachment proceedings against Justice Kennedy. So, what then is Kennedy's conclusion in the masterpiece Cake Shop case? Can you read his conclusion there on page 18?
All right. Kennedy writes the following. The Commission's hostility was inconsistent with the First Amendment's guarantee that our laws be applied in a manner that is neutral toward religion. Phillips was entitled to a neutral decision-maker who would give full and fair consideration to his religious objection as he sought to assert it in all of the circumstances in which the case was presented, considered, and decided. In this case, the adjudication concerned a context that may well be different going forward in the respects noted above. However, later cases raising these or similar concerns are resolved in the future. For these reasons, the ruling of the Commission and of the state court that enforced the Commission's order must be invalidated. The outcome of cases like this in other circumstances must await further elaboration in the courts, all in the context of recognizing that these disputes must be resolved with tolerance, without undue disrespect to sincere religious beliefs, and without subjecting gay persons to indignities where they seek goods and services in an open market. The judgment of the Colorado Court of Appeals is reversed.
Kennedy's conclusion, he reverses what the Colorado Court of Appeals does. But you have to look very carefully at what he said here. He didn't come out in his majority opinion and take a stand for the First Amendment of Jack Phillips and freedom of religion, freedom of speech rights. What bothered him was the hostility that the administrative law judge, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, And even the Colorado Court of Appeals showed to Phillips. And this is so important for people to understand. And this is why we've labored to lay this foundation so people can understand exactly what's going on here. Kennedy says, in this case, the adjudication concerned a context that may well be different going forward in the respects noted above. He says the outcome of cases like this and other circumstances must await further elaboration in the courts. He didn't come out and say, let's fix this conflict and stand up for the First Amendment rights of Jack Phillips. Right. What he said is this: bigotry is okay as long as it's not overt bigotry. That's what bothered him.
Maybe really we could say it like this.
Please.
Kennedy's saying, doggone it, guys, if you had just been a little more fair in the way you dealt with this, we still could have got the same conclusion.
Exactly right. If you'd been a little bit more under the table, underhanded, we could have fixed this problem. What he's saying is bigotry is okay if it's not overt, anti-Christian bigotry. What he's saying is smart bigotry, anti-Christian bigotry is fine. Stupid anti-Christian bigotry we can't tolerate. In other words, you guys at the lower court level, the administrative law judge, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, the Colorado Court of Appeals, you guys were just too dumb in how you did it.
You almost get the impression that in what Kennedy's saying here is that he's a little upset. That, doggone it, guys, if you hadn't handled this better, if you'd handled it better, then we could have got the ruling we wanted.
Exactly. Polite bigotry is fine. Impolite bigotry is not fine. Now, at one end of the stick, I'm happy for Jack Phillips because he got vindicated. Kennedy said he was the victim of impolite bigotry, and he got relief. However, this is a terrible decision. It didn't resolve the conflict we're talking about.
Didn't resolve anything.
In fact, I think it made the conflict worse. All it did is send a message to the world that you just go right ahead and discriminate against those Christians. Just be a little bit less open about your discrimination. So this is this a victory for Christianity? Is this a victory for the Constitution?
No,
not at all. It's what my basketball coaches used to call a hollow victory. When we went in and we played a team that we were supposed to beat, and let's say we beat them by 15 points, and we probably should have beat them by 25 to 30 points. They would say, well, you guys got a victory tonight, but it's a hollow victory. And that's exactly what Masterpiece Cake Shop decision is. It is a very hollow victory. And it's almost as if, Brother Jim, that we have been so beaten down by this culture and this legal system. When they finally toss a little crumb our direction, we think they're doing us a favor.
Oh, thank you so much.
And so what they did here is they gave us a crumb. But they did not fix a problem that's not going to go away.
No.
In fact, I think this issue is going to become worse and worse.
Well, it's almost like they purposely left the door open.
Yes.
So this could be dealt with down the road.
Exactly. Now, notice this quote here from Abraham Hamilton III, legal counsel for the American Family Association. Notice, and he sums up exactly what I'm trying to articulate here.
All right. Abraham Hamilton III explains that references to the 7-2 vote being a narrow decision have nothing to do with the vote count. He said.
See, and let me backtrack there. People think this is a great victory because it's 7-2. Well, you don't determine the breadth of a decision by the vote count. You determine the breadth of a decision based on its context and how it's written. So what he's saying is that the vote count was certainly lopsided, but this was not some kind of wide-scale victory for conservatism and constitutionalism. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. He goes on. He says, "Quote: When describing it as a narrow decision, the court had before it an opportunity to slam the door once and for all on the issue as to whether or not religious freedom would be upheld in every case, in every instance where it is challenged by same-sex marriage. But the court did not go that far. He explains, in fact, the opinion gives the indication that Justice Kennedy based the bulk of his reasoning in this opinion on the Colorado Commission's overt hostility toward Christianity, almost giving the indication that if they had been a little bit more subtle and discreet in their anti-Christian hostility, maybe they could have concluded in their direction. But because their record was so abundantly clear that the Commission, even in some instances, mocked the legitimacy of Jack Phillips' faith, that they were duty-bound as the high court in the country to rule against them, close quote.
In other words, because y'all at the lower court levels were so outrageous
You
in how you
dummies.
expressed
Yeah.
your bigotry, we're going to have to step in and do something. But if you'd just been a little bit more sly about it,
We got to cover up your mess, right? That's what they're doing.
just been a little more sly about it, just been a little more polite about it,
Goodness.
the results, and Kennedy says this, could have been very well different.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So no victory here. Victory for Phillips, praise God for that. No victory for the First Amendment.
Well, he
No
won.
victory for the Constitution.
He won the battle, but we haven't won the war.
Yeah. In fact, I would say a decision like
Maybe
this
lost
puts
the
us
war.
on the losing side of the
Yeah.
war. Now, the only adult in the room
Come on now, preach it.
was Clarence Thomas.
That's right. God bless him.
Clarence Thomas writes a concurring opinion, so it doesn't have the same votes behind it as a majority opinion, but it just allows him to express his mind on the case. He is the only one that dealt in this whole crowd of 9 jurists that I can tell that understood and specifically dealt with the collision between expanded civil rights laws and criteria on one end of the stick and a deterioration of the First Amendment on the other. I wanted Thomas's concurring opinion to be the majority opinion.
Should have been.
If Thomas's concurring opinion was the majority opinion, this would have been a win.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the way it played out.
That's right.
Thomas is the only adult in the room. He's the only one that actually deals with the actual constitutional issue.
The real issue.
And in fact, his opinion is the only one in here worth reading,
It really
although
is.
it doesn't have the same weight as the majority opinion. Can we read a few excerpts from what Thomas says? Do you have what he says there on page 12
I do.
of his concurrence?
Here's what Justice Thomas writes. According to the individual respondents, Colorado can compel Phillips' speech to prevent him from, quote, denigrating the dignity, close quote, of same-sex couples, quote again, asserting their inferiority, close quote, and subjecting them to, quote, humiliation, frustration, and embarrassment, close quote. These justifications, he writes, are completely foreign to our free speech jurisprudence.
Says the CADA, the way it's written, the way it was applied here, is completely foreign to free speech in this country.
Yeah.
Kennedy did not say that
Yeah.
in the majority opinion.
No, he did not.
Thomas did in his non-binding concurring opinion.
Yes.
And can you read what he says on page 13, quoting Clarence Thomas again?
Again, Justice Thomas writes, consider what Phillips actually said to the individual respondents in this case. After sitting down with them for a consultation, Phillips told the couple, quote, I'll make you birthday cakes, shower cakes, sell you cookies and brownies. I just don't make cakes for same-sex weddings, close quote. It is hard to see how this statement stigmatizes gays and lesbians more than blocking them from marching in a city parade, dismissing them from the Boy Scouts, or subjecting them to signs that say, quote, God hates fags, close quote. All of which this court has deemed protected by the First Amendment. Moreover, it is also hard to see how Phillips' statement is worse than the racist, demeaning, and even threatening speech toward blacks that this court has tolerated in previous decisions. Concerns about, quote, dignity and stigma, close quote, did not carry the day when this court affirmed the right of white supremacists to burn a 25-foot cross, conduct a rally on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, Forsyth County versus Nationalist Movement, or circulate a film featuring hooded Klan members who were brandishing weapons and threatening to, quote, bury the niggers, close quote. Now that's his, I'm reading his marks, not mine.
Right. You're reading
I'm just reading his statements.
Yeah, these are directly out of page 13 of Thomas's.
Right out of his written argument.
And his point is, look, hasn't the First Amendment protected all these other groups in the past?
That's right.
So why would it be different for Jack Phillips?
Yeah, exactly.
This is what we wanted. This is what I thought the court was going to do when they granted certiorari, the writ of certiorari. I thought they were going to fix this conflict, which they did not do.
Yeah.
One more fast quote there from Thomas on page 14.
All right. Thomas writes again in Obergefell. Now remember, he was on the court's decision making in that.
Yeah, 2015.
In 2015, and he writes, I warned that the court's decision would inevitably come into conflict with religious liberty as individuals are confronted with demands to participate in and endorse civil marriages between same-sex couples. This case proves that the conflict has already emerged. Because the court's decision vindicates Phillips' right to free exercise, it seems that religious liberty has lived to fight another day. But in future cases, the freedom of speech could be essential to preventing Obergefell from being used to, quote, stamp out every vestige of dissent, close quote, and, quote, vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy, close quote. If that freedom is to maintain its vitality, reasoning like the Colorado Court of Appeals must be rejected, he writes.
And we've used that quote at the top of the show.
Yes, we did.
He's talking about the conflict between the two.
Yes.
He's the only justice or jurist that dealt with this specific issue.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something, folks.
Wow.
If you don't have a Clarence Thomas on this court saying these kinds of things, a decision like this in Masterpiece Cake Shop has no constitutional wisdom in it whatsoever.
That's right. That's right.
And, Clarence Thomas...
Thank God for Clarence Thomas.
...was, when I was in law school, he was just being confirmed at that time.
Oh, yes.
And they, like Robert Bork, like Roy Moore, who they just dismissed through ad hominem attacks recently.
Yep.
And even like Paige Patterson.
Oh, yes.
Who just got dismissed from the presidency of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yes, he
See
did.
the pattern here, folks? If you're a conservative, if you're a constitutionalist, if you're a biblicist in any sense, they're going to do whatever they have to do to take you out. This is why they waged an ad hominem attack against Clarence Thomas in the 90s when I was in law school to prevent him from rising to this position.
That's right.
To prevent him from writing concurring opinions like this.
They vilified him.
And God forbid, if in their minds, if this concurring opinion would become a majority opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Which is what we wanted to happen.
Yes.
So this is the same playbook that the left uses over and over and over again.
Right.
And let me tell you something, folks. We need to wake up. You need to support people for elected office, whether they're senators, whether the President of the United States, who are going to commit to putting constitutionalists on the Supreme Court.
Like Clarence
Thomas.
That's exactly right.
And if we don't do that, this culture war's over. It's basically over.
Yeah. Amen.
They hated Clarence Thomas because, A, he's a true conservative. And number two, catch this, Brother Jim, can I say this? He's a black conservative.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't fit the narrative at all.
Not at all. That's right.
If you're black, you're supposed to be a leftist. You're supposed to be a liberal. And here you have this highly credentialed, Ivy League educated highly intelligent,
brilliant man
on the court, who is a man of color, black skin, and yet he holds to constitutional and conservative ideas.
Yeah.
I would say biblical ideas.
Yes.
And this is the type of person that they're trying to stop.
Yeah.
So, what are we trying to get at by way of conclusion? We're trying to say that the battle for free speech is not over, despite what everybody's telling you.
Yeah.
The battle continues. In fact, as I speak, there is another case. If I have my facts right on this, it's about to be handed down. I thought it might even be handed down today. I don't think it was handed down today. Maybe some of you can comment on the comment box in Facebook to let me know if it was handed down today. But this case may be even more important than the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. The title of it is the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus Becerra. I have a little citation from the National Review that explains this case and why it's so significant, maybe even more significant than Masterpiece Cake Shop.
Yeah. All right. David French is the one writing this, and he writes, the NIFLA case, however, is unquestionably about compelled speech. The state of California has enacted a law, the so-called FACT Act, that requires pro-life crisis pregnancy centers to prominently place a notice informing clients that California offers low-cost and even free abortions to women who qualify, and providing them a phone number that grants quick access to abortion clinics. In other words, California is requiring pro-life professionals, people who've dedicated their lives to protecting the unborn, by offering pregnant mothers alternatives to abortion, to advertise state-sponsored abortions. Unbelievable.
So you thought what they did to Phillips was bad.
This is unbelievable.
Forcing him to make a cake against his biblical convictions, against something that he disagrees with. Well, here comes the state of California.
Goodness
forcing a privately funded pro-life crisis pregnancy center to promote abortion as an option. Now,
wow.
I'm almost speechless when I reflect on these things. Does that not violate the First Amendment rights, the free speech rights, the freedom of expression rights of this pro-life crisis pregnancy center? You would think it would.
Yeah.
Well, guess what, folks? Your United States Supreme Court has already heard the oral arguments on this, and we're, like the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, sitting on pins and needles wondering what they're going to do.
Wow.
I would love to say I'm optimistic about how this case, Becerra, is going to come out. I don't have a lot of optimism based on what I just read in the Masterpiece Cake Shop. So what are we trying to get at, folks? The battle for free speech is not over.
No.
There is no decisive conservative victory in what we just got on Monday. I don't know what's going to happen with this next case.
Yeah.
But you are in the middle of a conflict between two long-standing ideas. Biblical
worldviews,
free speech on one end of the stick, and expanded civil rights coverage on the other end of the stick. And who's going to win? Who's going to win? Is Hillary going to win? Says we need to change. Is the California Assemblyman that we played earlier going to win, where he says we need to evolve with the times?
Evolve.
So hopefully what we did, folks, in this presentation, we went a little long. We apologize for that, but we gave you an introduction to the issue, gave you the facts of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the procedural posture, how that case reached the United States Supreme Court. We talked about the Supreme Court ruling on this and why it wasn't a great decision. We talked about Clarence Thomas, and he's the only light in the room.
Yes.
And then we showed you that this battle continues. And because I know a lot of you chimed in with all kinds of wonderful comments and questions, because we went over, we're not, I'm sad to say, able to take those at this time. Do you have any concluding thoughts as we get ready to sign off?
Well, I think that it's important to have programs like this because people are uninformed.
That's right.
And so we're trying to provide information, but not just for the sake of information. These are things you need to commit to prayer. We need to be praying for California. We need to be praying for our justices. But we really need to be praying for Clarence Thomas.
Absolutely.
Because he's under attack,
Yep.
as are we all.
Yeah.
So.
And this is what you're not getting from a lot of these conservative groups. They're
Yeah.
giving you snapshots or sound bites under the assumption that you don't have the attention span to sit through something like this.
Right.
But unless you get into the minutia, which we tried to do some, you're not going to understand what's going on.
That's right.
You're being sold on the idea that this is some kind of conservative victory,
Yeah.
constitutional victory, and it is not.
Well, it's like they're giving you a dollar bill on the front end, but in the back they're taking away 100.
Yeah.
They make you think they're giving you something, but really and truly they're taking away future.
And freedom is on the altar of sacrifice,
That's
as
right.
we're speaking. I can't think of a more delicate time in our history
I agree.
than what we're going through right now.
Yeah.
Well, I would invite you, by way of closing, to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yes.
This presentation will be uploaded very rapidly on YouTube. Just go to Andy Wood's Pastor's Point of View, type that in.
Yeah.
So you can get notified every time we post something like this. If you're interested in verse-by-verse dispensational Bible teaching 24/7, I invite you to get the app Grace Global Radio. I have a radio show on there, Bible teaching ministry show on there, along with many other expositors from around the country. If you're interested in seminary training, I would invite you to investigate Chafer Theological Seminary.
Yes.
I'm the president of that school. We'll train you in how to teach the Bible. Just go to www.chafer.edu. And the next time we'll be with you will be next week, June the 15th, 2018. I would think that we're going to be commenting on this new case that's coming out.
We'll see. I would add one thing quickly.
Please, yes.
You mentioned everything else, but if you're interested in good dispensational teaching, go to our website, go to the media page, and look at our media archives. We've got fantastic teaching there for you.
Yeah. And we're currently teaching the book of Revelation, as we mentioned before. But we like to... why don't you give our website address?
Well, our website address is www.slbc for Sugarland Bible Church.org. Check it out.
And do us a big favor. Would you click share if you're watching this on Facebook?
Yes.
And share this into your friends list. And every time you do that, you expand the outreach of this ministry.
That's right.
And you allow us to do what we do on Pastor's Point of View, where we're not so much doing a Bible study, but we're bringing hot issues and controversial issues that affect the body of Christ to as many people as we possibly can.
Yes.
Well, please pray for us as we pray for you.
Yes.
And we love you, and we'll see you next Friday here on Pastor's Point of View. God bless.
God bless.